let us read from another section of Roar of the Ganges, which is a book that takes place in India not too many decades ago. Its protagonist, the author, Swami Tadatmanandaji, then known as Mark, has gone to Rishikesh, a city in northern India on the banks of the Ganges, very famous and spiritually revered river, also known in Sanskrit as the Ganga. He has gone to become a Swami, taking a vow of sannyas is like monkhood, and so he is dedicating his life, although a former American computer engineer, to the ultimate spiritual quest. Yesterday, we were reading about the nature of the Vedas, which are ancient texts. At first, they were merely an oral tradition for thousands of years. And then finally, according to their own words, when the human mind was no longer capable of memorizing such texts, they had to start writing it down. About 2,000, 3,000 years ago, because they wrote on very fragile palm leaves, many of those leaves don't survive today. So the most recent copy, well, the most recent oldest copy of the Vedas aren't that long ago, still before the Bible, for our Western way of understanding ancient history. Nonetheless, they are humanity's oldest scriptures on philosophy, spirituality, science. I sat in the back of the room during Swami Prakash's chanting class. My mind wandered, drifting from thoughts of children taught in ancient gurukulas to the religious instruction I had received as a boy growing up in the Roman Catholic Church. I have always cherished Christianity's uplifting message of God's love for us. Even today, I sometimes visit a nearby Catholic monastery to join the monks in prayer. But when I recall the religious education I received as a boy, I am saddened because my experience was neither pleasant or helpful. I had attended a Catholic primary school, St. Margaret Mary, where we were taught by nuns shrouded in bulky black habits. When I was in first grade, I thought the younger nuns were like angels, pretty and ethereal as they floated from one classroom to the next. The older nuns, on the other hand, frightened me sometimes. Their huge dark figures vaguely resembled witches as they stalked down the corridors. Our school days were punctuated by religious activities. We recited prayers before classes, lunch, and recess. 3 times a week, we stood in ruler straight lines and marched in absolute silence to the cavernous church next to the school building. It was in that church that I had my first spiritual experiences. Sometimes, when light streamed in through the towering stained glass windows, and the thundering notes of the organ's largest pipes shook the floor, my face became wet with tears. I felt God's presence, or I thought I did. I didn't understand what was happening, but I was filled with awe, a mysterious and somewhat frightening experience for an 8-year-old boy. And hello, Sean. In this environment that I studied in for 8 years, in addition to the usual academic subjects, our daily schedule included a religion class in which we were taught the basics of the Catholic faith. We were made to memorize a catechism that defined for us in simple and unambiguous terms what we were supposed to believe. Who made the world? God made the world. Who is God? God is the creator of heaven and the earth and all things. What is man? Man is a creature composed of a body and soul and made in the image and likeness of God. Why did God make you? God made me to know Him, to love Him, and to serve Him in this world, and to be happy with Him forever in the next. What is hell? Hell is a state to which the wicked are condemned, and in which they are deprived of the sight of God for all eternity, and are in dreadful torments. What is purgatory? Purgatory is a state in which those who die, guilty of venial sins, suffer for a time until they have satisfied the punishment due to their sins. What is heaven? Heaven is the state of everlasting life in which we see God face to face and are made like Him in glory and enjoy eternal happiness, etc. Each day we had to recite the assigned passages from memory. Anyone faltering received a stinging whack with a ruler on the back of his or her hand, a punishment designed to humiliate the youthful sinner in front of the entire class. I remember learning that only Christians could go to heaven. All others were doomed to hell. Not only heathens and idol worshippers, but our Jewish friends as well. This seemed unfair to me. I thought that God, being great and all-powerful, would only be more compassionate. I didn't understand how God could be unfair. One day, I raised my skinny arm and shook my hand until Sister Eusebius called on me. Yes, Mark? What is it? Sister Eusebius, what about kids growing up in places like India? Maybe they don't ever get a chance to learn about Jesus. It's not their fault that they're not Christian. Will they have to go to hell anyway? Sister Eusebius frowned. Many missionaries have gone to India to spread God's holy word to the poor heathens. All of you should pray that God blesses our brave missionaries so they can save those miserable people from hell. But sister, I broke in, what about those who haven't heard the missionaries? It's not their fault if the missionaries don't come to their town. Do they still go to hell? Her frown turned into a menacing scowl. That is not your concern, Mark. You had better worry about your own soul. We are studying the infallible teachings of the Church. Would you dare question what the Pope himself tells us? Don't ask questions. You should have faith in the Church and what it teaches us. You had better pray to be forgiven for your lack of faith. The next time you go to confession, remember to tell Father that you have sinned by questioning what the Church teaches. In retrospect, I feel we did not receive proper religious instruction in those classes. What we received was indoctrination. Church leaders of that time apparently felt it important to instill proper beliefs in children so they would grow up to become good Catholics. I'm sure that they were well-intentioned, but their methods were draconian. I have been assured that the Catholic Church's religious education has improved greatly since that time. Now, it is not my intention here to malign the Church. I want to only call to attention to a problem with its religious education. In my case, as my young mind matured and grew in its ability to reason, I found myself assailed by a growing number of doubts not addressed by my religion teachers. I was unable to accept the Church's doctrines purely as a matter of faith. I wanted to understand. I needed to know how and why these beliefs were true. I felt deprived of the opportunity to understand my own religion. Many unanswered questions gradually undermined my faith and eventually led me to reject everything: church, Jesus, Christianity, even God. I stopped attending church as soon as my parents quit forcing me to go to each Sunday. By the time I was only 12 years old, I had become totally alienated from all spiritual or religious aspects of life. The indoctrination that was intended to bind me to the church proved to be the very factor that drove me away. Yet, there was another loss, far greater than my departure from the church. I developed an aversion towards religion in general. I became allergic to churches, prayer, and thinking about God. I resented having been ordered to set my reason aside, to question nothing, to simply believe. I would never surrender my intellect again. I developed a critical, skeptical attitude towards religion. Perhaps it was my skepticism that led me to abandon so many spiritual paths that I had experimented with years later. When I now reflect on those boyhood experiences, I see a startling irony. God created us with minds that can reason and doubt. It is natural to have questions. Then why should any religious or spiritual teaching condemn asking questions? If God gave us the power of reasoning, why should we be asked to abandon it? And if God has endowed each of us with an intellect, wouldn't He want us to use it to know Him better? It also seems ironic that, in spite of my bad experience with religious education, I eventually came to a spiritual tradition that emphasizes scriptural learning. One might suppose those catechism classes to have permanently dissuaded me from religious or spiritual study. But when I encountered the tradition of Vedantic teaching, I found a radically different approach. Expressing doubts and asking questions were encouraged. Opposing points of view were thoroughly addressed. In fact, the whole teaching style is based on teacher-student dialogue. The student raises questions, and the teacher answers. Perhaps one reason I was drawn to Vedanta is that it invites us to use our powers of thinking instead of demanding blind faith. It calls upon us to understand. It is composed not of creeds and doctrines, but of teachings meant to lead one to deeper understanding. For me, an orientation emphasizing knowledge rather than belief was crucial and remains so. So let us pause our reading there. And just to add to what Mark was sharing about questions being encouraged, even debate. In Sanskrit, the word is manana, and it is the second level of understanding in Vedanta. The first is shravana, to simply hear. But it doesn't stop there. One may hear something, but still not understand it. And so debate, which is what manana literally translates to, is required for understanding. But even intellectual understanding does not constitute realization. So one moves from debate eventually to nididhyasana, which is supplementary practices one can do to actually raise this in one's own experience directly. Now, thank you all for listening with me as we read through that wonderful section, in my opinion. And I'm happy that you related to that story. Woo woo.